Yeah.
Anybody online?
No one's online, but we're streaming live now. Okay, so
Steve is always has meetings.
Steve Keller, I know, yeah. Hopefully, Steve, you'll watch this later. All right. Good morning, Shlomo. Yeah, of course. Sorry. Ration and debt. I got to turn one page. Last week we learned Sif Aleph and talked about a few different categories of muktzah. We talked about muktzah mechmas chesron kis, that potential loss in the value. It means that I would never use this object or item, and if I do go ahead and use it in some way, shape, or form, I'm not allowed to move it in any way over Shabbos. Not even sometimes we're allowed to move things if they're in the way. Just standard, right? If I imagine I had a pen and there was a pen on the Shabbos table, and or maybe even a stack of pens. It's in the way. I'm making kiddush and challah, and all the food gets put out. So what am I supposed to do? It's it's on the middle of the table is a bag of pens. So I'm allowed to take it. No problem. I can take it and move it. I'm allowed to. Because of a category called muktzah, because it's called a kli. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. 1 second. I just have to eliminate my voice, my echo voice. Sorry. Okay. Good morning, Richie. How are you? Let me pass this down to Richie. So I'm allowed to move things that are a klisha malachta le'aser. If something is used for a prohibited, generally speaking, for prohibited purposes, like a pen. Pen is used typically for writing. But it's in the way, with Sorech Makomo, I'm allowed to move it out of my way if I need the space where the pens are currently sitting. But when it comes to something that's muktzah mechamas chesron kis, but if it's something that's valuable that I don't want to ever lose its value, so I never use it in general, I'm not even allowed to use that to move that to the space. Okay? That's a special category of muktzah that even if I need the space, I'm not allowed to move it on Shabbos. If it's muktzah mechamas chesron kis, it's something an item that's set aside, which has tremendous value and is not used for any Shabbos purposes. Like if it was obviously an expensive thing, but I use it on Shabbos, it's very different. That's not booked to them. That's set aside. And the other category we talked about last week was basis l'davar ha'asur. Something that's a basis. It's holding up something else that is itself prohibited. I use the candles as an example. The candlesticks themselves. What's wrong with a candlestick? Nothing, but the candle that goes on into it, that is obviously something that you can't utilize on Shabbos. It could be lit from before Shabbos, but once it goes into Shabbos and it's holding up something that is asur, namely the candles, which have a flame there. Even once the flame is gone, it's the oil has run out, the candle has burned out. I'm not allowed to use that the rest of Shabbos. Not allowed to move it, I should say. So that's a muktzah, that's a basis l'davar ha'asur, a base for something that is prohibited. So those are the two categories we delved into a little bit last week. Today, we're going to begin with the ration and test Sif Beis. So just to get to Richie up to speed here, who's joining us. We're talking about the topic of hatmana, but really it's not hatmana, it's about the categories of or hatmana in things that might otherwise be labeled as muktzah. Can you do hatmana in things that are muktzah? And if you do, how do you get it out? Because you're not allowed to move muktzah. So that's where we're holding right now. So we're going to continue now with Sif Beis. No, it's on my edition. It's the next page. It's page 60. Yeah. Okay. Hanosnin avonim ulevenim seviv hakadera. So if you place stones and bricks around your pot of food, tzorech sheyichadem, you need to designate these stones lekach laolam, for this purpose forever. That they're not just stones, they're not just bricks. These are stones and bricks that I use as a way of insulating my food. Shaharei calls man shalo yichadan, because if you do not designate these stones as such or the bricks as such, einam chashuvim lo, then the sticks and the stones and the bricks, they're not so chashuv, they're not so important in our eyes. Umashlichan. So what will I do after I do the hatmana? When the hatmana is over, I'll take the pot of food out, I'll take the stone, I'll toss it. Nobody wants extra stones in their house. I'll toss it. I'm gonna open the door. I'll toss it out the door, which shows you that this is just a stick. I'm sorry, this is just a stone to me. It's not designated and set aside. This is a regular stone, and regular stones, right, are muktzah. You're not allowed to go out outside. I tell my kids all this all the time when we're walking to the park. Whatever, they're learning, right? Sticks and stones and dirt are what Rav Shechter calls, they're called junk. You don't need them. They're junk, in his words. And therefore, if it's junk, you don't need a stick. You don't need a stone. There's no purpose for it. You could use it for something, of course, but any stone. This stone wasn't set aside for any purpose. Therefore, it's muktzah, and that kind of muktzah also, that one we're more machmir about, and you have to be, you can't move it. So now, if you're going to use stones as a way to insulate the food, you're going to build a wall around the pot in such a way. You need to mimiyached. You need to designate these stones before Shabbos as being usable for this purpose. Hilkach asur letaltalan im lo shiyatzniemu miyachad lekach. Therefore, it is prohibited from moving these stones or bricks unless you set them as you put them aside. Right? Matzniya means to hide it. You put it aside, and you designate them for such a purpose. Then your stone is no longer a stone. I told you, pet rock collections. You can use pet rock collections on Shabbos because you're designating it. This is no longer a rock; it's a pet rock. It's now my rock that I have a collection, and it's no longer the kind of rock that I would just simply throw outside or that I would collect. That it's no more special than the rocks that are outside. That we find out there in the world. Therefore, right. So therefore, in this case, you have to set it aside if you want to use it for hatmana purposes.
What's the reason that we find stored?
Because the reason, yeah. So that's sort of classic muktzah actually, because it's set aside. It's those stones. I don't have a usage for them, right? If there's no usage for them, right? The whole purpose underlies muktzah. This is a whole rabbinic institution. Is to protect us from the deoraisa of carrying on Shabbos. The less we move around things on Shabbos, the less likely we are to violate the deoraisa of carrying, of taking things dalad amos bereshus harabim in a public domain, or going from a reshus harachiyach to reshus harabim, private to public domain, or vice versa.
Why would that be in the house? In my house, it's always reshus harachiyach.
Right.
And if you say, well, maybe when you're outside, but everything could be outside. I mean,
right. The idea being is that certain categories are ruled off limits, and the rabbis didn't make a differentiation even within the home. Perhaps the fear was because I might take it mereshus hayachid lereshus harabim, right? Because once I take it outside that door. If it were Reshus Harabim D'Oraisa, which is as I mentioned last year, it's a complicated threshold to meet the Reshus Harabim D'Oraisa in our day and age, or even in the days of Chazal, for that matter. We do, and I talked about the hutch. We mentioned that Rav Shechter has like the Mishnah Berurah. If you have a rechov that goes me'ir la'ir, right? That's not something that you could ever build an eruv around. An eruv doesn't work for Reshus Harabim D'Oraisa. Eruv helps when you have what you could either term a Reshus Harabim D'Rabbanan, which in the Gemara's terminology is a karmelis. It's basically a public space, but not one that is traversed by enough people, 600,000 people on a daily basis, to bring it up to the level of a Reshus Harabim D'Oraisa. So that Eruv helps for that, but it doesn't help for a D'Oraisa Reshus Harabim, and that's the fear really we're talking about here. The rabbis made decrees that to protect the Torah. This is a classic geder around the Torah, in order that we decrease the percentage, the likelihood that there is a violation of Torah law. They restricted the movement of certain things, and that's even in your house, because if you go from in your house to right outside your house, first Mishnah in Masechah Shabbos, that's a problem. That's a problem. So that would be my al regel achas answer to that question. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah now. Sifkat on Yud. Sifkat on Yud. Lekach la'olam. Right. This is that if you're going to use the stones or the bricks around, you have to be meyached them. You have to designate them as such forever. Hainu, says the Mishnah Berurah, sheyichada me'erev Shabbos. Has to be erev Shabbos. You can't do that on Shabbos. That doesn't work. Lahatmi bahem tamen, and you make it a designation. It could be in your brain. We talked about. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to say it verbally out loud. You designate these ones that these are my hatmana stones. I'll use them forever for hatmana. That's my the ilav hachi. Because if you don't designate it as like these are my hatmana stones, like forever. You just I'm gonna use it one time. So ye asar lamachar. Then if I'm just using it one time, then tomorrow on Shabbos, it's prohibited. L'taltala mishum muktzah. It's set aside because it's not a stone that you have given it a purpose. You gave it a temporary one-time situation. That's muktzah still. That's still in the category of junk. It's a stone that I'm going to throw outside, as soon as I'm done with this hatmana situation. Same thing with wood, right? You have wood that you want to burn as fuel over Shabbos, from before Shabbos, obviously. Be very careful to use that wood as what you close off the hole of the oven. I used to use wooden boards to close as we've discussed a number of times. They used to use wooden boards to close the hole of the oven. They would put it on top as a way to retain the heat. So you have to be very careful that the wood that you use to close the oven on Erev Shabbos is set aside for that purpose, and that it's not omdim lahasaka. If it's set aside for burning, then it is set aside for burning, and that's its purpose, and you're not allowed to use it for something else. That's what it's said. That's what it's designated to be. It's set aside for that purpose, and almost like a little bit like the muktzah mechmas chesron kis. The idea is that it's set aside. This is its usage, and it's very expensive. And if you're going to use wood, and the wood is going to be consumed, and or maybe it won't be. It won't be consumed here because it's acting as the piece that closes, right? But nonetheless, it's not the usage that it was designated for, right? If you have things that have multiple designations, that's fine, and you can use it in different ways. But if something is miyached in a pile of wooden logs that are set aside, that they're sitting right next to my fireplace, which are clearly supposed to be used for asaka, for fuel, then I can't take that wood and remove it from that category, right? What was that?
Can't use it.
Right, exactly.
Unless you did multiple use, you can make something like a stone that today I'm going to use it for. You do only for that purpose that you designate.
I believe it if you designate it for multiple mutter purposes, I think it's fine. But the point is that it becomes it becomes a kli at that point. It becomes a vessel almost. And once it's now something that I own, it's a vessel. It has a kli. Whether it can be used for hatmana, my rock. Maybe I have a special rock. I remember my grandfather had something like this on his desk when I used to visit them. He had a fancy rock as a paperweight, right? Paperweights are mutter. There's nothing wrong with a paperweight. If you're, you have one?
No, I don't, but I have seen it.
Yeah, a rock as a paperweight. So no problem, because you were designated it. It's all the purposes that it could be used for are permissible, as long as it has been designated as such to be forever, not just temporarily. Oh, I use it as a paperweight. I was sitting on my deck and there happened to be a rock and the wind was blowing and my papers, whatever. So I took a rock and I put it there no, that I can't do. If I have a rock that's a paperweight, and you just before Shabbos, I think it, and that's I'm always going to use it for a paperweight. Look, maybe in 2 years I'll decide, I don't like it anymore. I'll throw it outside. But the idea is that as of now, I think that this is my paperweight for the rest of my life. So it could be also paperweight. It could be this. Once it's a paperweight, then you could use it for hatmana too, because it's a rock that is in the category of has a purpose, is usable on Shabbos, and I designated it as such from before. Okay. Yud Aleph. Uma shlifa. So that you'll throw the rock away if you don't designate it. I knew la'achar shenishtamish b'hem after I'm done using it. Right? Haderech lashlicha machutz. I don't want extra rocks in my house. I don't have a purpose for them. I'm going to open the door and I'll toss it outside. She'ein alehem shem kli. It's not a kli. If you could change something to being a kli, right, then it's usable on Shabbos, because a kli, as soon as it's a kli that you do permissible actions with, a kli has a purpose. right? A kli is a pot. A kli is a utensil. A kli has a function, right? She'ein aleim she'em kli. But right now, if it's a one-time usage, that's not a kli. Ve'enam chashuvin. It's not chashuv enough. One-time usage, just a stone. I'm going to throw it outside after I'm done. It's still set aside as like a category of nonsense, non-usable, or not usable, but not on my radar. The adam makze dato. And why is it called muktzeh, by the way? He tells you here. The adam makze dato, man. In my mind, a person has set it aside. I'm not using that on Shabbos. I set aside rocks and stones, sticks and stones outside. Stam das. I set it aside every Shabbos. I'm not touching them. I'm not moving them. I'm not playing with them. Right? If they're outside. If I miyached them, then I've given it a shame kli. But otherwise, I've set aside from my mind all stones and sticks from when Shabbos starts. That's why it's muktzeh. It's set aside from my brain. I'm not using these things. That's the origin of the term. If you have stones or bricks that are placed on top of the oven all the time, meaning they have some sort of cooking, right? They're placed there. It's like my pet rock. They're always there. This is their purpose. Shari letaltalinu demiyuchadin latashmish. They're usable. I leave them in my house all the time. If I didn't leave them in my house all the time, if I didn't have a need for them, derech ha'adam is to throw it away. We don't just keep extra stones in our houses unless we have a need for them. So if it's designated, they always sit on top of my oven. They're there for any usages. Then it's been miyached for any usages in the house. It's no longer set aside from my mind.
Disposable.
Right, it's not disposable. These are non-disposable rocks. Then I can use them. Okay, good. Let's go to Gimel up on top. Hatomein bekupa maleya gize semer. If I do hatmana in a box, so let's say I have a pot that's hot. I want to keep it hot. And I open up a box and I fill the box, because the box in and of itself is not a problem. Remember, Hatmana has that something is touching on all sides of my pot. A box, not necessarily. Maybe it's touching on two sides, but if it's a round pot and the box is square or rectangular, by the very definition of the shapes we're dealing with here, it cannot be touching on all sides. And also probably it's not touching on all sides because it has to be enveloped, not just touching on all sides, but enveloped. So what do? I put gizeh tzemer. What are gizeh tzemer? Woolen shearings. And then I fill the box with wool. Think about the esrog. Those aren't wool. The old esrogs that when I was a child. Now it comes with a styrofoam, whatever that is. Whatever, I don't know what that is exactly. The hair.
It's horse's hair.
It was horse's hair. Right, from the tail or something like that, right?
I don't know how they did it, but it's horse's
hair. And they would wrap the esrog. That's hatman. It was wrapped in the hair. Right. That's hatman. So imagine you could have they as easily could have packed esrogim in the past in wool. They could have take the wool shearings off the sheep. You put the esrog in, it probably would protect it nicely, and the pita won't break. Okay, but that's the same idea here. So I take it, I put in the box, I fill the box with wool, I put the pot inside, I make sure the wool is covering on all sides, I close the cover of the box. Now I'm retaining the heat. Okay, so which is not permissible to move. Now, why are gizeh tzemer based on our last year? Not permissible to move. Take a look here. The Mishnah Berurah does Chazara for us here. Yud Beis. Hainu she'asar letaltel. Hainu she'osam shehukzu l'schora. These woolen shearings were set aside for business purposes, for merchandise. I was going to use them to sell in the marketplace. If I have that, so it is in a category called muktzeh mecham as chesron kis. It's set aside from my mind. I'm not going to use these. I never use these. Even on a Wednesday, I don't use them because I don't want them to get ruined and lose value. So when I go to the marketplace, I want to be able to sell them at my highest price possible. So I don't use them on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and now suddenly I use them on Shabbos. So it's muktzah because I set them aside, even though nothing wrong. There's nothing inherently usher about wool and about wool. In fact, if anything, it's mutter. Wool is just it's wool. Nothing more to it. But because of that, it's set aside because I don't want a chesron in case I don't want to lose the value. Therefore, I can't move it on Shabbos. And so if I do hatmana in these gizei tzemer, which are not allowed to be moved, the hotzi akadera. But let's say, like in the previous seif, we had talked about back up on top of the Shulchan Aruch. We talked about how do I get it out. So if there's a handle, I can pull it out and shake off the wool. It's tiltul min hatzad. I'm moving it indirectly. So let's say I remove the pot, kol's man shelo niskalka lahaguma. Let's say that I don't ruin the guma, the hole. In this box, there's a shape. Imagine the shape is a pot.
There's a collapse.
Right? If the shape holds up, right? Maybe on the top, by the way, it's not maybe a hatmana in a formal way. Just to back up here. It may not be a hatmana in a formal way because maybe on the bottom, on the sides, and when I open the box, I take it out. If there were something on top, well, it's obviously niskalkala. It's also obviously ruined at this point because the top part won't be. Let's say it's on three sides. There's a hatmana on three sides. I take it out. I close the box. I serve whatever I want, and I put it back in the box. And if the shape holds up of the wool. That's what they're describing here. The hole is not ruined. Even though the wool, I can't move it. I can put it back though, because I don't need to move it. If it gets messed up, then I'm going to have to move things to create the space again for the pot. But as I mentioned last time with the story of Rav Soloveitchik, right? I have a story. The child. This is again. Is this legend already? Sometimes stories get to become legends. He had a family over. The boy, they had children. Shabbos meal. The child is starting to play with the Rebbitzins lichter. He's touching the candlesticks, just touching them, feeling them. Maybe there's a shape on it, whatever. Feeling it. And the father is going nuts. He's like, I'm in the Rav's apartment, house, and he's touching the candlesticks. And the father is the Rav. So sees the whole thing. He's playing with his fork. He's just moving it. He's like nervous. The kid's gonna break. He's gonna touch. And at a certain point, whatever the kid's like, stop, please stop. You can't touch that. So the Rav, kind of looked at him and said, what he's doing is mutter. What you're doing is asr, right? You're moving the fork for no reason, which is I talked about last time, questionable, right? But if you don't have a reason for moving things, you can't move it on Shabbos. The kid was touching it, not moving it. You're allowed to touch things that are muktzah. You can't move muktzah. That's the difference. So you can touch muktzah, you can't move muktzah. So here in this case, I'm not moving the wool. It's staying in its place. And therefore, it's mutter.
It's interesting because I always thought don't touch it.
Don't touch, right? We always say don't touch it. So I actually correct myself. Sometimes I say that also. I say, no, don't move that. It's not the touching that's a problem. It's also litaltel. You can't move it. Touching something that's muktzah is actually fine. And here's your proof for that right here. The proof is in this spot right here. Sorry, where are we? Okay, so the imnis kalkula, what happens if the hole gets ruined? I move it and then the wool falls apart, just kind of collapses. So lo yachazirena. Right, then you're not allowed to put it back afterwards. Why not? Because the point is you're gonna have to move things around. Now he adds in one more fact about this whole case. And you can even a priori, you're allowed to remove the pot al das lahachzira with it in mind that I'm going to put it back if it doesn't get ruined. So I'm allowed to go into this whole situation. I'm allowed to put it back. Below chayshin, and the rabbis are saying, this is the Erev Shabbos and the Shabbos I did this. So the returning it is going to be on Shabbos. The rabbis did not make a gezerah. They did not decree that you can't put it back. They're not allowed to put it back because sometimes it might fall apart. rabbis make gezeras like that. That even though it should be permissible by letter of the law, they take the gezerah further and they say, well, we can't put it back because sometimes it might fall apart. Then you're going to end up moving it. They didn't make such a gezerah, so you have to be honest with yourself. Is the situation one where the guma held up, and now when I put it back, the gizeh sema are not really moving. I'm just putting it on it, or did it get ruined enough that now I'm not allowed to put it back? So they leave that to you, according to this first opinion, to figure out. But of course, there is another opinion. V'yesh Omer. This is the opinion of the Rambam in his Perush Mishnayos. The first opinion that we saw was really, again, based on the Gemara, based on the Mishnah and the Gemara, the opinion of Rav and the Gemara. So this is the Rambam's, Kinech on the whole topic. V'yesh Omrim shafilu taman bedavar shemuta letalta. Even if you do hatmana, this is a very machmir opinion. You do hatmana in something that's permissible to do hatmana in. Im niskalkala haguma, if the hole gets ruined in which you were doing the hatmana, lo yachazir. Even if it was totally mutter, not the gizeh tzemer that were set aside for business. Let's name it here. I'm doing hatmana in my shirt. I put it in a box, put my shirt, or a blanket. I have a blanket. Blanket's more realistic. All right, I put the thing down in here, and the blanket's good. It's holding up, and I close the box. A blanket. What are you making? You're hotling me about a blanket? It's definitely permissible. I'm not selling a blanket on the market this week. If the hole gets ruined, my blanket is kind of all out of shape, I'm not allowed to return it back. Lo yachazir on Shabbos. Why? The pot needs its place if it needs to be, if you want to return it. Because it looks like, this is what the Rambam said, it looks like you're doing hatmana anew on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to do a new hatmana on Shabbos. We talked about you're allowed to do hatmana from Erev Shabbos into Shabbos if it's a davar shel eino mosif hevel, if it is not increasing heat, so a blanket, for example. However, if you are going to do hatmana in a blanket on Shabbos, that is prohibited, because lest you do it hatmana in something that increases the heat. So this looks like you're doing hatmana anew on Shabbos when you return it into the blanket, and even though you are allowed, by what we talked about previously, you are allowed to hatmana. If you had hatmana from Erev Shabbos into Shabbos, you're allowed to return it into its situation. If it was all davar she'eina mosikim hevel, you are allowed to return it. But since it was taken out and now got ruined, and you're kind of recreating it, it looks like a new hatmana. This is what the Rambam's chiddush is. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah second. Richie, you want to say something?
Yeah. So the action of hatmana is physically
Enveloping it.
Yeah, physically taking material and putting it back.
Yes.
So if you're not physically adding material, insulating material, it's not hatmana. It's not hatmana. Hatmana requires an action. Right?
Hatmana requires an action. That's correct.
Placing insulating material around a hot device that you want to keep.
Right.
So when they say increasing hevel, what is how does
Heat. So an example would be, the Gemara's example is a scrap, a pile of olive scraps that are sort of, it's like almost like a compost pile, right? Compost pile, don't ever stick your hand inside it. It's quite hot. What's it called? Like Greenberg Nature's. Right. Like they have a compost pile over in the nature center here. Sometimes I take my kids to go there. There's like a farm animals there. It creates its own heat. Right. So that's an example the Gemara used. Right. The rabbis were very well aware of the idea of exogenic heat. Another example would be putting it over the coals. So this is why I mentioned a number of times, over the last few months, if you people, they sell in Judaic stores those blankets to keep the food warm. I think I told you my Rebbe calls those Machal Shabbos blankets because they call them Shabbos blankets. And he calls them Machal Shabbos blankets because you can run into problems with it, because if you put your hot plates, you're heating up your food for Shabbos day on your warming tray. You put the potato kugel there and the grilled chicken right next to it, and then you take the blanket and you place it on top of it, and then you do the following, and then you tuck it in along the corners.
That's how.
Now you have hatmana, because now you have three sides that have been, because you neatly tucked it around the edges there, and on the bottom, of course, you have the hot plate.
Hot money, you have to envelop the whole thing.
The whole thing has to be about. So if you leave a little bit open, it's okay. So I think I reported that I asked the question about the challah to my Rebbe. I asked him about some people sometimes put like aluminum foil around the challah and they put it on the hot plate because they want to warm up the challah. That kind of. So he said that was okay because I made the case that's like the pot for the food, right? The pot is not considered part of the hatmana situation. So but he said I don't see why it's a big deal. You can't leave a little place open at the top of the aluminum foil. Leave a little part that's like exposed, and therefore it's not hatmana. Hatmana is a complete insulation of the food. So warm jar is fine because from the hatmana perspective, because it's not touching on all sides. You're putting it inside a box essentially, but it's not. Hatmana is enveloping it, in a material. Yeah. If you're going to use the warming jar for heating food though on Shabbos, just be careful to cover the dials or whatnot that there could be adjustable knobs or dials.
If you're serving dish for your chont,
Right.
came in a box with styrofoam, and there's an exact little shape.
That's right. It's exactly cut out for that.
It's exactly cut out, and you save that thing. You just stick it in the styrofoam.
Yes, that would be hatmana with davar she'ena mosif heno, right? Unless I put it on top of the hot plate. Now it's a situation of mosif heno. It's increasing the heat.
But this is a guma that really can't be miscalculated because it's
The material is it's impossible for it to be
It's not
miscalculated.
mold that can collapse.
Right.
It's that shape. It's made
So
of
then it would be, I think, permissible to put it back in. I even think the Rambam would not have a problem because there's no niskalkala haguma situation that could happen.
But let's say there's another piece of styrofoam
That goes on top,
was packed for the top.
right? Yeah, that's hatmana, which is
That's-
permissible. But it has to be from Erev Shabbos. You can't do hatmana on Shabbos. A new hatmana,
A new hat.
right?
But if you had the das to return the pot, let's say the pot is in this box with the styrofoam around it. It's got the styrofoam.
Right.
It's packed very tight because that's how they make it.
Right.
And
Then you take it out to serve the cholent. You
take the
distribute.
pot out, you serve it, then you put it back.
You want to keep it as hot.
Put the top on.
Yes, I think so. I think there you are allowed to do that because you had it from hatmana from before Shabbos, and then you're returning it to the hatmana. That is permissible, 100%. Yeah, very good.
Sorry to interrupt with.
No, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. Okay, good. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's comments here. Yud Gimel, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled. Yud Beis, She'asur l'taltel. This is if we read that part. That it was set aside for merchandise. Look, Yud Gimel. Yochol lahachazira the chazara muter b'Shabbos. Chazara, as we just were talking, based on Richie's question, Chazara returning the pot on Shabbos to this situation, b'davar she'eno mosif hevel, which does not increase the heat, is permissible, as we talked about for the elder Rishon and Zayin Sifdal. That's a explicit psak halacha in Rishon and Zayin. That's our main siman about hatmana. In Sifdal, we paskin, black on white that it's permissible. The in this kalkula gedalet shenoflu hagizin mikan umikan. So how do things get ruined? When the wool kind of collapses on this side, that side. Lemkom moshav hakadera, and it falls to the bottom of the kedera. Right? It kind of collapses in. Lekach lo yachazirena. So now you can't return it to that situation. Lefisha mazis as hagizin, because now you're going to have to move the gizin. You're going to have to move the wool. Shu muktzeh, and that was set aside from my mind, right? Because it's set aside for this Torah.
You can't put it on top of it because by top of it, you're moving it. Is that what they're saying?
Can I put it on top of it?
I'm not talking rebuilding this thing, but just.
No, so I think that you could do in the same way that you could do it before. That's the problem. That's the problem, right?
It's not clear about that.
Yeah, I think that's the case. That's the problem. To put it back on top, you're not doing anything. You just, but it won't help you. Whatever insulation you're trying to gain out of that situation, it's not going to help you anymore at that point. Or at least it's much less because even if it's in a box, so maybe it retains some heat, but once the wool is not tightly on it, it will just, put it this way, it's not what I intended, in terms of the, retaining our heat.
But what would be the problem even if it's not wool, if it's, some material that, has no value in it, but you built it around it. Took it out, it collapsed. So if you're making it again into the shape, you're actually building a process. So the value shouldn't be an issue here.
The value saying of the wool.
Or wool or any material, because if you build the shape again, you're forming a new.
You say it's like a new hatmana.
Yeah.
Right, that could be a separate problem here. Right, so correct. That's a step. The next step. Meaning the Rambam says that's why by things that are permissible, I'm not allowed. If it falls apart, I'm not allowed to do hatmana.
Okay.
Here you have a double problem because you have the muktzah and that. Yes, that's true.
So the Rambam,
Yeah. The Rambam, that's the Yesh Omrim approach. That
which makes sense.
yeah. So okay, do we paskin like the Yesh Omrim or the first opinion? So take a look at the Be'er Halacha for a moment, where it says V'yesh Omrim Shafilu Taman. He says here, Hine be'Eli Rabba who's the Shin Aleph? Shagasaria, maybe? No, it's not. Oh no, Sharachon, excuse me. Thank you. My brain kicked in. Be'Eli Rabba Usharachonim. We follow the first opinion. If you have something that's mutter, the davar hamutter that you do hatmana and it falls apart. So you have a blanket or a pillowcase inside the box and you take things out and then the thing falls apart. You're allowed to readjust it and put it back in. We don't follow that second opinion of the Rambam, the Yesh Omrim. And that's what it seems like from the Mechaber as well, because he calls it a Yesh Omrim, and there's a theory out there that if he does one opinion and the Yesh Omrim, he sides with the first opinion. Okay, but those you want to be machmer like the second opinion, I'll give you someone to hang your hat on. Ubebeir Hagra, the Vilna Gaon writes, he brings a proof from the Yerushalmi that supports the second opinion. Okay, so you want to follow like the Vilna Gaon? I follow the Vilna Gaon. So I can't tell you in my life that this has come up ever. Period. I don't think it's ever come up. So I know there's a minhag on this one. It's not. But if you want, you can rely on the first opinion, which is not strict for the second issue of a new hatmana when you kind of rebuild the situation. Take a look here at the next part of the Shulchan Aruch. Daled. Tama medavar she'eino nital v'chisa pia bedavar hanita. Let's say I do hatmana in something that is not movable. Take care, Richie. Is not movable for Shabbos purposes. So let's say the around this is something that is muktzah. Okay, so you come up with your example. The gizeh tzemer, something. Set it.
Where are you now?
Sif Dalet in the Shulchan Aruch. The chisa pia, but the top is covered with davar hanita. The top is a different material of the satmana situation, and that I can move. Megale hakisui, so now it's time for me to take the thing out. So I uncover the kisui because the kisui is movable material. The oches bakidera umotzia, and then I remove it that way. So I'm not allowed to. Remove the things on the side. I have to take it out by the top. Okay, that's not a surprising halacha. Take a look at Tezvav. B'davar she'eino nital shenosan davar muktzah s'vira kadera. I placed something that's muktzah around the pot. Okay, we're in the Mishnah Berurah now. Tezvav down below. And the im tama b'davar hanital v'kisa b'ya b'davar hashem nital. So now let's flip the script. If you do a hatmana in something that is movable around the sides, and the cover thing on top is not movable because it's muktzah. So now we have a gravity problem. because right when I move it, by definition, it's gonna it will fall. So so you should clear out the sides. The oches bakadera, grab onto the handle on the side, umotzia, and pull it out from the side. Now, what's going to happen? Obviously, it's going to move, but we'll talk about that in a second. Why am I allowed to? Why am I allowed to move the pot in the first place? Isn't it a basis for the material on top that was mukta? So the answer is the lo says basis line. It's not a basis. It's not a base for it.
It's on top, it's not on the base.
Well, no, the pot, which is mutter, is the base, and now the in the second case that the Mishnah Berurah comes up with, the mukta thing is on top.
Right.
The mutter stuff is on the side. So I move the mutter stuff off the side. I then now have it's been set up that the pot is a base for something that's awesome, but that's not a basis. Kamosh Kasav Sof Sifal, as we talk about the end of Sifalef. Why not? Because it's not subservient to the thing on top. The candlesticks serve the candle, right? The pot does not serve the wool, right? The wool was there for the pot,
Right.
So it's not a basis. A basis has to be think about it's an eved it's a servant to the thing that's on top. Then it's a basis. But it's not a basis. But now what do I do with the wool that's on top? Let's for example, so I clear out the sides, I pull the pot out, and now but you know what's going to happen? Some of the wool is going to come with it. But how do I get to this? So what do? I shake it. Menar sakadera, and then the muktzah will fall off to the side, and that's called tiltul min hatzad, indirect movement of muktzah, which we allow when I have no other choice. Here it's on top of the pot,
Correct.
right? So even if I pull it out, some of it's going to come with it, so I have to move. That's what he says here. Okay, let's take a look at hay. Maybe we'll end with hay today. Let's go back up on top. Taman vechisa bedavar she'eino nita. Let's say I do hatmana and I cover it all around with muktzah. It's enveloped in muktzah from before Shabbos. Imikta sakadera megule, no telu machazir. If a part of the pot is exposed, so let's say on the top we didn't do hatmana on the top. So it's I realize it's not really hatmana, but they're using the word a little loose. Shulchan Aruch is using the word loosely right now. If I have a part of the pot that's exposed, so no telu machzir, I can take it out, put it back in, take it out, put it back in, as long as I'm not moving whatever the material is. Like we talked about with the wool, if it's like the hole is, not ruined, I'm always allowed to put it back. V'im lav, and notel, if it's not exposed on any of the sides. So congratulations, you've now trapped your food there for the entirety of Shabbos. You cannot get it out. If there's a way to do it, we talked about, right? If you could theoretically stick, if it's not a pot, but let's say fruit, and I could stick a needle inside and, kind of poke a hole into the fruit and then pull it out like almost like a fishing rod. And it's going to move the things like that's tilted outside. But here we're talking about a pot. How are you going to pull a pot out with a stick is not going to help, a needle's not going to help. Nothing you can do, right? You have to get your hand in there. In order to get your hand in there, you're going to end up directly moving the muktzah. So therefore, the food is now trapped. So don't do hatmana in something that's muktzah. That's the advice.
Shabbos is no Shabbos food.
What was that?
There's no Shabbos food. So how do you celebrate Shabbos?
If you don't have food now. Yeah, that's the problem. So now in that situation, so then we could cobble other halachas together. Right, the whole thing is the Rabbanan in the first place. So you should ask a non-Jew. We go to a non-Jew. We ask one of the. If this happens to you, ask one of our staff here. They'll come over to your house. Believe me, they've done this before. They come over to your house and they'll uncover it because that's a shvus. The shvus, a double the Rabbanan. Right, asking a non-Jew is the Rabbanan. They're doing a Rabbanan action. So you have cobbled two Rabbanans on top of each other. B'moko mitzvah. Here the mitzvah is of mitzvahs Orei Shabbos that you're allowed to do. So that's not so don't give up hope completely, but then you have to start becoming creative, in how you solve the problems. Okay, right. However, also we'll talk about that. We'll talk about this when we get there. There's the idea of doing things kila achar yad, right? If you're in a real bind, You can do things abnormally. Sometimes that knocks it down to the
Shinoi.
rabbanon with a shinoi. So there's hope, but you have to get more creative. All right, we'll stop here. We'll pick up with Vav next time, which talks about the complicated situation of the Yom Tov being on Friday, Erev Shabbos, and how you want to do Hatmana, and it may not be so simple. So that'll get into a whole topic of binyan, of building on Yom Tov.
That's coming next week.
With a little tiny, dose of it, not